I want you to picture a scientific conference. Just, close your eyes and imagine it. You're probably seeing, what, a hotel ballroom, maybe some lukewarm coffee in styrofoam cups.
Yeah, and some guy in a tweed jacket pointing at a PowerPoint slide full of, dirt samples.
Exactly. It is usually the least dramatic setting on planet Earth.
Usually. Until you take that boring conference and throw a geopolitical grenade right into the middle of it.
Right. Imagine that same conference becomes so controversial that it causes a global schism in the entire field of study.
The whole field splits in two.
It gets expelled, literally kicked out by its own parent organization. It becomes a battleground for international politics involving protests, bans, and these secret high-stakes meetings in Paris.
It sounds like the plot of a spy novel, doesn't it? But we are, and this is the wild part, we are actually talking about archaeology.
We are. Today, we are digging into a book that documents one of the biggest, messiest fights in the history of academia.
A really big one.
It is titled Academic Freedom and Apartheid: The Story of the World Archaeological Congress. It was written by Peter Ucko and published way back in 1987.
And we should clarify right away, this is not your standard textbook about, digging up bones or carbon dating. This is a primary source document. It's effectively a manifesto and a diary about a massive rupture that happened in 1986.
And it all centers on a question that I think is, well, it's even more relevant now than it was 40 years ago.
Definitely. Is science ever truly neutral? Or does this idea of academic freedom sometimes provide, I guess, a hiding place for ignoring injustice?
That is the mission for this deep dive. We are going to explore how a debate over academic freedom versus human rights just tore the archaeological world apart, all during the height of the anti-apartheid movement.
And we're seeing it through the eyes of the man who was right in the center of the storm, Peter Ucko.
So to understand the storm, you really have to understand the landscape before it all blew up.
Right. Ucko spends the first part of the book just setting the stage. The year is leading up to 1986. The governing body for all of this is an organization called the IUPPS.
Which is a bit of a mouthful. Let's break that down.
It is. It stands for the International Union for Prehistoric and Protohistoric Sciences.
It sounds incredibly dusty.
It was. I mean, think of the IUPPS as the old guard. It's this very established, very traditional international body. They hold a major congress every few years, and in 1986, it was Britain's turn to host.
And this is where Peter Ucko enters the picture. He's a professor at Southampton University in the UK, and he gets hired as the national secretary. So basically, he's the guy in charge of organizing this whole massive event.
Yeah.
But reading the intro in Chapter 1, it is immediately obvious that Ucko isn't interested in just, keeping the seat warm.
Not at all. Ucko is a disruptor by nature. He opens the book with a very sharp critique of his own field. He argues that the IUPPS, and archaeology in general, was just far too Eurocentric.
An exclusive club.
Exactly. He felt it ignored viewpoints from what he calls the third and fourth world.
He didn't just want a meeting. He wanted a global exchange. But before we even get to the politics, I love that Ucko describes the absolute logistical nightmare of just trying to pull this off.
Oh, it's great.
Chapter 1 is titled, How Not to Finance a Congress.
It is a surprisingly honest look at the sausage making of academia. We tend to think of these international bodies as these well-oiled machines, but he describes the fundraising as shambolic.
Shambolic is such a fantastic British word for total disaster.
It fits perfectly here. He details the struggle to get underwriting, the disorganized committees, just a lack of support. But his goal wasn't just to pay the bills.
Oh, he was trying to change who got to sit at the table. He wanted indigenous people, people from developing nations, the people whose history was actually being studied, to be the ones presenting the papers.
And that's the key. So you have this ambitious, slightly chaotic organizer, Ucko, who wants this diverse global congress, but then reality crashes in. This is the mid-1980s.
And the global movement against apartheid in South Africa is reaching a boiling point.
This is where the rubber meets the road. We are in chapters 2 and 3 now. The political climate in 1985 was incredibly intense. There was this global push to isolate South Africa culturally, economically, academically.
And Ucko is based in Southampton.
Yeah.
In Chapter 3, he details the pressure he was under locally. I mean, this wasn't just vague international vibes.
No, this was real.
We are talking about the Southampton City Council, the student unions, the local community. They were all telling him, if you let South African scientists come here, we are shutting you down.
They threatened to pull funding. They threatened picketing. They threatened to make the conference literally unholdable. And this is the dilemma. The World Archaeological Congress, or WAC, had a binary choice.
Do they allow South African scientists to attend, or do they ban them?
And they chose the ban. They decided to ban South African and Namibian participation.
And just to be clear for the listener, Namibia was under South African occupation at the time.
Right, so they were sort of lumped together.
Exactly. Now, you might think, okay, makes sense, down with apartheid. But this decision is the flashpoint.
It is. You have to understand the IUPPS, that parent body operates on a core principle of free academic exchange. Their rules, and the rules of almost all international scientific bodies at the time, said that everyone should be welcome.
Regardless of their country's politics or laws.
Exactly. So on one side, you have the IUPPS saying, science has no borders, we don't care about your passport, we care about your data.
And on the other side, you have the WAC, Ucko's group, saying, we cannot host representatives of a racist apartheid regime.
It's a clash of moral frameworks. And Ucko documents how everything just starts to unravel. People who initially said they'd come started pulling out. The press got involved. It wasn't just an administrative decision anymore.
It was a line in the sand. And the parent body, the IUPPS, was furious. Which leads us to the showdown. We are looking at chapters 4, 5, and 6 now. The narrative moved to Paris, January 17th, 1986.
The meeting of the IUPPS International Executive Committee. This was the trial. Ucko describes trying to get third and fourth world representatives there to plead their case, to explain that if the South Africans came, no one else would. The conference would be boycotted by the rest of the world.
But the old guard wasn't hearing it.
No. The IUPPS Executive Committee officially expelled the WAC. They disowned the Congress entirely for banning the South Africans.
And they didn't just disown them.
No, they decided to hold an alternative official Congress in Mainz, Germany, instead. They basically said, you are no longer the real conference. We are taking our ball and going to Germany.
That is a massive rejection.
Yeah.
And Ucko does not pull any punches about how he felt. The title of Chapter 5 is just. It's Western European Manipulation and Presidential Timidity.
You can feel the venom in that title, can't you? Ucko viewed the decision not as a defense of freedom, but as a desperate attempt to protect the status quo, to keep the club exclusive.
He felt they were hiding behind the rules to avoid taking a moral stand.
That's his whole argument. So the WAC is kicked out. They have no parent organization. Most people would probably just cancel the event at that point.
I mean, the funding was already precarious.
Exactly. But then we get to Chapter 6, which Ucko titles Cancel and Door Be Damned.
Which captures the spirit perfectly.
It does. On February 8th, 1986, the WAC Executive Committee meets. And instead of folding, most of the members resign from the IUPPS connection. They decide to stick with Ucko and the boycott. They go rogue.
It's practically a mutiny.
It is. They chose to forge ahead as an independent entity. This is the split that defined the field for years. They were betting that the moral imperative of opposing apartheid was more important than the official seal of approval from the RUPPS.
And the amazing thing is, they pulled it off. We get to chapters 8 and 9, and Ucko reveals that the Congress actually took place September 1986 in Southampton.
Against all odds. And based on Ucko's narrative and the photos in the book, the atmosphere was completely different from a standard academic conference.
Because the IUPPS had pulled out, a lot of the traditional Western European scholars didn't come.
But scholars from Africa, Asia, and South America did. The people Ucko wanted there in the first place.
There's this one specific photo mentioned in the book that I think really paints the picture. It's described by Jane Hubert.
Oh, you know the one you mean.
It shows a Sani child, that's an indigenous person from northern Scandinavia, playing with a Turkish puzzle ring. And where's this child sitting? On the lap of a Quechua Indian from Ecuador.
That image is the thesis statement of the whole event. It symbolizes that global mixing Ucko was fighting for. You have indigenous peoples from opposite ends of the earth connecting. Ucko contrasts this sharply with the tweed jacket Eurocentric past.
So it wasn't just professors reading papers, it was a meeting of cultures. And according to the book, the participants loved it.
The verdict was apparently overwhelming enthusiasm for this new inclusive format, but, and we have to play devil's advocate here, what was the intellectual cost? Or rather, what was the philosophical argument that justified the ban? Because banning scientists because of where they live is a very slippery slope.
Right. And in Chapter 10, The Aftermath, Ucko really lays out his philosophy. He has this line that stood out to me. He says, academics cannot hide behind the shaky edifice of their own academic freedom.
Shaky edifice. That's a strong critique. Ucko's argument is that until apartheid ends, priorities have to shift. He says academics must prioritize freedom itself over academic freedom.
So essentially, you can't have true academic freedom if people aren't free in the real world first.
That's it. If the black population of South Africa can't vote or travel freely, then a white South African archaeologist claiming academic freedom is just benefiting from oppression.
He's saying that clinging to the idea of academic freedom while ignoring state-sponsored racism is a form of complicity.
Precisely. And he tried to institutionalize this. He includes appendices in the book letters to UNESCO, things like that, showing that he wanted to make this the new normal for international science.
So Ucko clearly sees himself as a pioneer here. But this brings us to the reception of the book. Because not everyone agreed with his version of events or his methods. When the book came out, the reviews were, well, mixed is an understatement.
Oh, it was incredibly polarizing. And looking at the reception section of our source material, you see that people were angry for very different reasons.
Let's start with Sandra Bowdler. She had a bone to pick with the title itself.
She did. She called it a false title. She picked up academic freedom and apartheid, expecting this deep philosophical debate, about the nature of freedom under oppressive regimes.
And instead?
Instead, she felt she got a bureaucratic account of organizing a conference minutes, funding issues, logistics. She basically said, this isn't philosophy, this is the diary of a meeting planner.
So she wanted Plato, and she got a spreadsheet.
Essentially. But then you have J. Desmond Clark. He was much more critical of Ucko personally. He described the book as an ego trip.
An ego trip?
Yes. Clark felt Ucko was portraying himself as the leader of a humanitarian crusade. He thought Ucko was centering himself too much, acting like the savior of the discipline. He basically accused Ucko of having a messiah complex.
But there were also substantive political critiques, right? It wasn't just about Ucko's personality.
Correct. And this is where the debate gets really interesting. Connor Cruz O'Brien wrote a review in Nature, a major science journal, arguing that the boycott was simply ineffective.
He claimed that banning individual academics did absolutely nothing to change the apartheid regime in South Africa.
And that it just silenced dialogue, that it curtailed free speech. He worried it set a dangerous precedent. If you silence researchers because of their government's actions, where does it stop?
Do you ban American scientists because of U.S. foreign policy? Do you ban Chinese scientists?
Exactly. He saw it as damaging the universality of science without actually hurting the South African government.
There was also a really important point about the Nazi occupation, wasn't there? This feels like critical context for why the Europeans were so dead set against the ban.
It is the most crucial bit of context, and maybe the one Ucko underestimated. Critics noted that Ucko just seemed to ignore the European perspective. Many continental European scholars, French, German, Dutch, they'd lived through the Nazi occupation, or at least its immediate aftermath. For them, academic freedom wasn't a buzzword.
No, it meant protection from state interference.
Exactly. They had seen what happens when politics dictate science. They had seen Jewish professors purged. They had seen curriculum rewritten by the state. So they believed science had to exist outside of government.
So when the WAC started banning people based on politics,
to those European scholars, it looked frighteningly similar to the political purges they had fought against. They saw the IUPPS as a sanctuary that Ucko was violating.
That is a really heavy perspective. It makes the IUPPS's resistance make a lot more sense. It wasn't just stubbornness.
No, it was a trauma response to history. It's a clash of two different moral frameworks. One says science must stay out of politics to survive. The other says science is inherently political and we must choose the side of justice.
But surely Ucko had supporters. It wasn't all bad reviews.
No, not at all. Larry J. Zimmerman, for instance, called the book courageous and candid. He acknowledged that Ucko was biased, and Ucko himself admits his bias, but Zimmerman praised him for documenting the personal struggle. He felt that thinking archaeologists would see their own ethical struggles reflected in Ucko's story.
So he saw it as a necessary document of a difficult time, even if it was one-sided.
Yes. It is less of a balanced history textbook and more of a manifesto or, a war diary. It's raw.
Which brings us to the legacy of this whole event. The book ends, and we are left with this split. What happened next?
The split eventually healed, for the most part, but the WAC still exists today. It remains a distinct organization with a focus on indigenous rights and political engagement. The questions Ucko raised didn't go away.
They fundamentally changed how archaeology is done.
They really did. You can't just swoop in, dig up stuff, and leave anymore without engaging with the local people. So, if we look at this book, what is the real takeaway? Is it a manual for how to run a conference? or a warning?
That's the question.
I think if we synthesize all this, the book is less of a philosophical treatise, as Baudelaire complained, and more of a blow-by-blow account of a specific political rupture. It's a case study in what happens when the ivory tower gets smashed by the real world.
It forces us to look at the messy reality. And it forces you, the listener, to ask, does banning individuals to protest their government's actions actually work?
Or does it just cut off the very people who might be your allies inside that regime?
That is the hard part, isn't it? By banning all the South Africans, did they isolate the regime, or did they abandon the liberal academics inside South Africa who are fighting apartheid from within?
And we know there were many anti-apartheid archaeologists in South Africa who were suddenly cut off from their global colleagues.
That's the dilemma Ucko leaves us with. He chose his side. He believed freedom itself was more important than the feelings or careers of those individual scientists. He believed you cannot do business as usual with an immoral regime.
It really makes you think about our own time. We deal with boycotts and cancel culture, though that's a loaded term, and questions of academic responsibility constantly.
The parallels are striking. The specific conflict was about apartheid, but the core tension is timeless.
It is. Where does a scientist's responsibility to their field end and their responsibility to the world begin?
Can you be a good archaeologist if you ignore the suffering of the living people on the land you are studying?
Ucko would say absolutely not. The old guard would say that your job is the data, not the politics. And frankly, both sides have points that are hard to dismiss.
And I think that tension is where we're going to leave you today. It is a fascinating story of a conference that became a crusade. Peter Ucko's Academic Freedom in Apartheid might be from 1987, but the fight it documents feels like it could have happened yesterday on Twitter.
Absolutely. It is a reminder that even in the study of the ancient past, the present is always right there, demanding to be heard.
Well, that's it for this deep dive. We hope this sparks some thoughts for you about the intersection of science and justice.
Definitely something to mull over.
Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.